Isaac Woodward, welcome back to The Overlook, to the audience. Welcome to the Fields Project channel. I'm excited to talk to you today about the Islamist apologist nun from Bethlehem that Tucker Carlson had on his podcast. So welcome. I'm sure it'll be not heated between me and you, but like a very impassioned conversation today.
Yes, we have a lot of thoughts. It's great to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, you're my favorites to react to this stuff with. For those who are new to the Fields Project channel, me and Isaac have been talking about Tucker Carlson, or Qatari Carlson, as people started calling him, which I think is hilarious, for the better half of almost 2 years now. And we were kind of at the front of that conversation, just identifying that maybe his talking points were not in line with a pro-America, pro-Western, pro-Christian perspective. And there's a very concerted effort and campaign to distort the truth. And I think this episode perfectly exemplifies that. And so we're just going to jump in. We're going to jump in around the 12-minute mark. It's an hour-and-a-half episode. And so for the sake of time, we're going to point out some fallacies or just falsehoods that are made throughout the video. And then down the road, I would love to do more specific episodes on some of the content that we're not able to address in this reaction video. So here we go.
Punish the Christians for Islamic terror.
Because I don't think it's Islamic terror that's taking place in the first place. I think we have to disabuse ourselves of that notion that this is a battle between Muslim and Jew, or that, constantly you heard after October, the October event was that the Hamas.
Or the justification for it is that there's a lot of Islamic terrorism, there are a couple intifadas, there are a lot of suicide bombings, and it's Islamic terror. And most Americans have been taught for 25 years Islamic terror is a threat. And, there's some truth in that, of course. But so we assume that Christians would be getting an exemption from all this. Why would Christians who are not responsible for Christian terror, there's no such thing, why would they be penalized for this? Why wouldn't they, again, when the patron saint state is majority Christian, why wouldn't the Christians there be getting some kind of special pass? I just don't understand that. Why punish the Christians for Islamic terror?
Because I don't think it's Islamic terror that's taking place in the first place. I think we have to disabuse ourselves of that notion that this is a battle between Muslim and Jew, or that, constantly you heard after October, the October event was that Hamas. Even to this day, we hear it's Hamas,
Yes.
Hamas. What is Hamas? Hamas are people who have had their homes taken from them, who, if they live in Gaza, have not been basically been in an open air prison for certainly the last 20 years going on. Even when the Israelis withdrew from Gaza, they didn't leave open borders. There was no freedom for people in Gaza to develop their economy. If I know people who wanted to try to go to school in America and couldn't get out of Gaza, had a Fulbright scholarship and weren't able to leave.
I mean, couldn't get out.
Israel didn't give them permission. So what kind of freedom is that? If you live in Gaza.
They couldn't even fly out?
No. And their airport had been bombed in 2000 and early on. 2000, there was an airport built soon after the Oslo Accords. But Israel has intervened many times in Gaza and little by little destroyed. When I first went there in 2002, after the second intifada started, I remember saying to my mother back home, this is genocide, even that genocide by Chinese water torture. But now we're seeing genocide on steroids.
You're American, I should say.
Yes, I'm born in America. Yeah, lived in America. And so getting back to Hamas, so also the school I was at has 350 girls. It's in a town that's 98% Muslim. Though it has roots, it's the roots of where Bethany, where on our school grounds is a stone from the 6th century. This is where Christ met Martha at the resurrection. So we're talking about, and it's the road leading, there's still part of the road that existed when Christ walked during that time and would have seen Lazarus and Martha and Mary.
I don't know why that's okay. So it tons of mosques sit upon former historic Christian monuments, and in the Holy Land that happens to just be on the land where Christ walked. So there's a lot here, Isaac. I'm going to let you kind of take the first points, but the fact that she's trying to disavow this narrative that it's not a war between Muslims and Christians or Muslims and Jews is it misrepresents what's happening on the ground. If you go to Israel, this is an inherently religious conflict from all sides, and to not view this in an ethno-religious way, I think is so disingenuous. She's making a claim that this has more to do with statehood and that religion doesn't really play a part in it, and that it's not Islamic jihad. I'm going to pull up the Hamas charter to see what Hamas says about themselves, but if you want to take over some of those points.
Yeah, again, it's we covered this in one of the past ones of the whole this wing won't give the devil its due, essentially. Like, if you can't believe the direct words of the actors you're talking about, in this case Hamas, what is your proof? She acts as if it's just kind of absurd and chuckles at the idea that this is about Islamic terror or about the idea of Arab supremacy controlling the holy sites, controlling this claim to the land. If you read the founding documents of Hamas, of Islamic Jihad, of these other groups, they explicitly tie it to religion. They explicitly make it that cause. But also, I think even more disturbingly, just if you were to take her at face value there, it's a massively horrific indictment of the majority of Palestinian population. If you're just saying all it takes to be Hamas is like, you have your house taken,
Palestinian, yeah,
you have restrictions of travel or other things in Gaza, and that makes you Hamas. Well, you're basically saying this population of several million are capable of the kind of atrocities that we see, of using human shields, of beating, raping, torturing their own people whenever they've been crossed. There's been countless videos that come out of Gaza of them killing their own people when they're seen as collaborators or run afoul for whatever other reason, or they're found to be gay. So implicitly, what she's trying to do as like a defense, excusing, oh yeah, Hamas isn't so bad, is just saying, okay, you're saying these people are tantamount to just the average Palestinian going around, and yet you're trying to hold this up as the victim population and thinking that if Israel just backed off, you could get peace. But if you take her at her own logic, that all it takes for the people to be Hamas or something else like that is to just have land issues or deal with this or that oppression, that is a horrible moral indictment of the people, because it is not natural human nature that when you have bad circumstances, you have to go and rape and pillage and chop off breasts and put babies in ovens and kidnap and do horrific things. That's not the default human state. And we've covered this. We've screened the footage for people here in DC. We've seen all the real things, and the pride and the bragging and the glory that they took in the atrocities they did. You cannot tell me that's about somebody losing their house. That's a far sicker disease that has to be eradicated.
Even if you just look at the footage of October 7th, it's like Allah Akbar, like they're praising Allah. There's like deeply religious undertones and taking pride. There's one story that I know me and you've heard many, many times, of a Palestinian civilian who came in after the Hamas terrorists and killed Jews and called his family and was like, you'd be so proud. Like, I killed them. I slaughtered them with my own hands, his mother and his father. And there is a deeply religious undertone to Islamic Jihad and to Hamas in their charter. This is Hamas's charter. This is the other thing, kind of to your point, it's like not even taking Hamas at their own words and not listening to Hamas. And if you just look at the charter, this is not a charter of a political movement. This is a charter of a political movement that is dressed and motivated by religious undertones. Not even undertones, it's very explicit. So it's the Islamic resistance movement. Even you can look at the call to jihad. There's eschatological reasons as well. Rejection of the peace settlement. So there are obviously political undertones as well. And then here they quote the Hadith talking about how the end times will only be ushered in once every Jew is killed. So it is deeply religious. So to have this nun kind of claim it's a political movement, I think is something I also saw happen a lot when I was in my undergrad programs, where they would say, no, this is not a religious war, because if it was a religious war, then they would have to confront the fact that radical Islam is a huge threat in the region. And if you're an apologist for Islam or Islamism, that is something you can't reconcile. So in order to not confront all of the issues with jihad or Islamism, you try and downplay it as just purely a political movement, which we see kind of Tucker Carlson trying to do on his podcast. And what this nun is like explicitly saying. My other big frustration with Tucker Carlson is that there's no pushback. Like, this is his new like tactic. It's kind of like Candace Owens and her just asking questions. With Tucker, he doesn't ask anything beyond whatever his guest is putting forth. And it's extremely frustrating. So to those who are Tucker fans who are listening to this, just ask yourself, like, why doesn't he push back at all? Why does he push back against Ted Cruz more than he does the president of Iran or this nun making a claim that Hamas is not inherently religious, when again, out of their own mouth, they are.
Jesus' tomb is down the road, right? And so permeated even with Palestinian Muslim culture is the sense that Christians lived here and they recognize Jesus as a prophet. So they respect him and so there's, I'm not saying that everything is perfect.
They respect him as a prophet, but not as Jesus Christ, Lord and Savior. And if you look at the Ottoman Empire, even at the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople now, Istanbul, there's not like a respect for Christian monuments. They take them over and convert them into mosques. So this is just a false statement altogether.
And to go even further, it's like saying the same name, but it's an entirely different character. They don't believe he was the Son of God. They don't believe he died on the cross. They believe that was like a lie and a calumny. They called Christians and polytheists for believing in the Trinity. They think it's horrific, the idea that you think God would come down and like sacrifice for us and be killed on a cross. How weak, how feminine. Like this is how Orthodox Muslim theology treats it. So I mean, yeah, you can say the name exists, but it's an entirely different character. They often desecrate crosses. They call Christians among them crusaders. There's too many examples to list, but to the extent Christians exist in the mind of Palestinians, it's as a mascot or a puppet to be used to try to galvanize support in the West. It's not actually, and there's literally no way to refute that, because if you think they're actually valued, why do they not have the same free speech rights, political rights, rights to convert as their neighbors? Like,
why has Christianity
legal policies? So it's not even up for debate. She can vaguely say, oh, the average Palestinian has such warm, fuzzy feelings about their Christian neighbors. And oftentimes there are good relations that happen. It's, everybody's complex. But if you're looking at the justice of a government and a society that would have control over a certain area of land, you have to look at the statutes, not just vague anecdotes about if, Muhammad and Khalil get along at the market when they meet up and can talk about how they both believe in Jesus.
And since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and census data is really hard to come by, but I actually did work for us here at the Theological Project. I'll link it down below, looking at how there's just been an ethnic cleansing of indigenous Christians across the Middle East because of Muslim persecution. We have many friends who are even refugees in Israel because they were kicked out of their villages in Lebanon by Hezbollah. This has been happening since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and Christians and Jews are dhimmi, so they're second-class citizens. And there have been different Islamic governments that might provide some protections, but it's like as a second-class citizen. But I don't think you can argue that just because Jesus is a prophet. I mean, even the devil recognizes Jesus. That doesn't mean that that the world and the devil is on a mission for the gospel. So again, I think her even pointing this out is it's evil. But anyways, I'm gonna hit play because I feel like I could stop at every point of this interview and say that.
And have divisions between, just like even with Christians, some Christians might think we should have allow politics to be in the church or legislate Christian morality, and others would think totally different. So you can have sort of differences of opinion, if you will, and we can all live with each other between that. So with Muslim and Christian, they can have their differences, but overall, the Palestinian culture is infused with both. There.
So you were a nun in a majority Muslim town, a Christian nun in your habit, I assume.
And which also was to an advantage because pious Muslims are not jihadists, the ones that I know. I'm not saying other parts of the world that may be the case, but in Palestine, it's simply not the case, or Syria or Lebanon or Iraq. The Muslims there, for the most part, are, they've all grown up together, the Christians and the Muslims, and there's a certain amount of commonality and respect. And so being dressed like this was just like many of the women there, right? So they kind of respected that. There's the same sort of conservative culture. There's the same sort of idea that we're both have some same basic values of compassion for our neighbor, of taking care of our families, and trying to live. They have their form of fasting and almsgiving, and it's actually very important to them. And I think the best parts of Islam come from its development from Christian ideas that Muhammad came to know. I'm sure of that. You can sense it.
This is a very different story from the one that we're told in the American media, that Christians are imperiled by Muslims in the Middle East.
They are not imperiled by Muslims in Palestine. That is an absolute fact. And
I'm sorry, I can't. The Christian population is almost completely diminished across the Middle East. Even if you look at ISIS, if you look at Iran, which is something Tucker didn't talk about in his interview with the president of Iran, it's the fastest growing underground church in the world because of religious persecution. So to somehow be like, oh, it's a lie that we're being told in the West that Christians are being persecuted at the hands of Muslims. Like, this is like a new, the Tucker Carlson, this is just so new. This is so fantastic. Like, we didn't know about this here, but it's just a lie. It's a lie. I don't know if you have anything to add.
And she kind of backpedaled at the end, but she even went so far as to say pious Muslims in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, don't view this religious lens. They don't have clashes with Christians. And nobody's saying everybody is always this or always that, but Syria is literally the site of the civil war. They now have a former ISIS person leading. There have been roving gangs killing Christians and Druze in southern Syria. ISIS, their caliphate was literally in Syria and Iraq, largely formed by people coming from those regions. So if you don't want to think that the place that birthed ISIS and where it existed, where they tried to create a caliphate, has a problem with religious extremism, she's just not living in reality. No. And there are differences among Palestinians and what their goals are. We've talked about this in previous things. There can be different versions of Islamic supremacy or how they seek to rule things. ISIS, in their Sunni form of Islam, wanted to recreate a caliphate going back to the time of Muhammad, or a few of the immediate followers of him, and make it international, like stamp out disbelief and make everyone dhimmis or to convert. In Palestine, it's true, there's more of a nationalistic goal that they have, but there's still Islamic supremacy encased into law, more so in Gaza, but even in the West Bank. And it's just amazing that she goes about this trying to paint this picture, not referencing at all that she would be legally prevented from proselytizing or sharing the gospel or teaching those Muslim kids about Christianity and trying to persuade them to do that while she's providing possibly free services to that local area. If that's not a form of discrimination and second-class status, I don't know what is. And there are no equivalent statutes like that on the books in Israel. So again, it's just a complete distortion of who is treating Christians better.
I believe in the Gaza Strip, interfaith marriages is illegal. That's like another reason why the Christian population is greatly diminished there as well.
So this was funny. Years back on one of our trips that you helped me lead these programs for our Leadership Institute, we spoke to people affiliated with Hamas at some level. And this was a chance to hear from the horse's mouth of a former elected politician about what exactly they espoused. It was a different climate back then. And a question was specifically asked about interfaith marriages. And it was the most hilarious response we got from this propagandist. He said, "Oh, no, interfaith marriages are totally fine. Like all the time I have, Christian friends or others who will marry a Muslim and then they become Muslims.
They have to convert."
Yes, Christians can give up their faith, submit to Islam, and then lose their identity. Yes, that is possible. But to claim like, if you can't go two ways, then it's clearly not an equal system.
And I think another thing to point out is that there are a lot of Arab, because Palestinian Christians are Arab, who also adhere to liberation theology and have been radicalized by the movement popularized by Hamas or other radical groups who do want to fight for a Palestinian state and self-determination. So they might have more political sympathies with an Arab Muslim, like this nun as well. I think Mother Isaac also kind of adheres to a more liberation theology framework. So that's important context as well, that this nun is not even kind of probably speaking from the same theological basis that maybe even me or you would adhere to. And obviously she's been radicalized and her worldview has been compromised, as evident by a lot of the stuff that she's saying.
Yeah, that's just simply not the case. And again, going back to my school, in our school, we had icons, which are part of the Orthodox tradition, pictures of saints and crosses in every classroom. No problem with that. I could show you a photograph, I can't now, but of the graduates of the latest high school graduation. And, they're embracing the nuns there. They're dressed actually in a more secular way. And yeah, it all
So a lot of
together.
your students were Muslim?
All, yeah, 98%. The only Christian
of your students were Muslims?
Yes, yeah. And about half the teachers during the time I was there, some Muslim, some Christian.
In a Christian school?
Yes, and actually that's all throughout Palestine. The Orthodox is relatively small. We do have schools in many of the Palestinian towns, but also Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, and most of the population, most of the students are Muslims.
Well, yeah, because the PA doesn't provide the infrastructure that they should for education. And so the church comes and steps in because the corrupt PA government misappropriates funds for jihad and for the resistance movement. But that's besides the point.
And
if you go ahead.
And it's a noble thing she does, serving and educating and all that. But for Tucker to like fixate on that as if it's some form of tolerance. No, it's a Muslim supremacist government lets Christians come in and provide free services, but also does not let them actually proselytize or teach the gospel or actually affect society in any way other than just giving free resources. So it's not like an act of largesse for a Muslim governing structure to just let Christians do things and serve for free. And it's a noble thing that they do. Hopefully sometimes some truth can slip in past those censorship policies they have, but it is not a point in their favor that they take free services.
Yeah. It's not evidence of religious pluralism. It's evidence of the large vacuum and gap in which both in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, the governing bodies, the PA respectively, and Hamas have failed to provide the critical infrastructure needed. And there's a large misappropriation of funds as well. The other thing too, which I think is funny, is she's talking about like, oh yeah, there's a church and there's icons. And that's evidence that, yeah, we're a flourishing Christian population. It's like, okay, well, if you go to Israel proper, like sovereign Israel, there's churches everywhere. Like if you look out into like the old city of Jerusalem, you see the tops of churches across the landscape. Christians can worship. There's a Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the middle of the old city. So like saying like there's a church that exists in this area and that's evidence of religious pluralism and freedom, then okay, if you look to Israel, that's also there as well. So her argument, I don't think.
And the contrast there is, we talked about this before. If you're in the old city of Jerusalem, you hear the call to prayer multiple times a day, blaring out. It doesn't matter if you're at a synagogue or a church or anywhere, you can hear it everywhere. And in contrast, it's not just the existence of different religions, but in Israel, if a Jew goes into a mosque and wants to become Muslim, he can. If a Christian wants to become Muslim, all of the different versions can happen. And that's actual tolerance, not do you have like a shell of Christians that can be there and only marry themselves and suffer legal barriers and impediments and then provide free services to the Muslim majority country. The level of actual toleration there is massively different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And being in the old city is like one of my favorite things because you have the Christian quarter, you have the Armenian quarter, which is also Christian, you have the Jewish quarter, and you have the Muslim quarter. And there's tensions. Like sometimes we've been there and like you can almost feel some of those tensions is like palpable in the air. But there's like this overarching level of like tolerance and coexistence. And that's just been the historic precedent in the old city. And so, yeah, it's very different. And throughout this whole interview, they paint it as like, oh, but that contrasts Israel because there's persecution in Israel. And that's not true. Me and you have been to Israel, like I think me 7 times, you 8 times. We bring a bunch of Christians. We go tour all of the churches. We're openly Christian. We wear our crosses. And we've never experienced the level of persecution that Tucker Carlson's trying to frame as the reality in Israel.
Oh, and the beautiful thing about where the great danger is, if the Christians continue to diminish, a key part of Palestinian society and within Israel as well, you go to Nazareth, you'll see many Catholic-run hospitals, schools, and so it's a fabric, it's a part of the whole character.
But
Nazareth is in Israel, like Israel proper as well. So she's almost like even like self-contradicting. She's like, oh, if you go to Nazareth, there's a bunch of Catholic churches. Yeah, well, that's in sovereign Israel. Okay, anyways.
I'm just still confused by the idea that the Christian population is declining under Israeli rule. Yeah. You would think just the opposite.
What gives them what I observed from my time in Israel and going back every year is that they do not want any Palestinians there. So the majority of Christians in Israel and Palestine are Palestinian. So they have to leave too. What grieves me.
They're so sloppily mixing categories here. They're saying Israeli rule, all of that. As a brief overview for new people, there's Israel itself, close to 10 million population, about 2 million of that are Arab, and most of them are Muslim. They have the same rights, all those freedoms, and they also are exempted from military service, so they have less duties. That is Israeli control and how they treat people when they actually have a legal framework and military supremacy. They allow that toleration. It is a different situation in the West Bank. Ironically, if Israel were to just totally annex the West Bank and Gaza, which she would hate, Tucker would hate, all of them would hate, they could impose those kinds of freedoms in that area. And then Muslims, Christians, and Jews in there could live, theoretically mix, and all have those types of freedoms. If that were to happen, they would say it's more occupation. They would hate it. So it's a lose-lose. If Israel pulls out, the Christian population in the West Bank and Gaza will continue to decline. So to the larger amount of control that Israel exerts in a given area, they've seen their Christian population increase. Christian population in Israel under Israeli control has gone up, not down. In the West Bank and Gaza, largely due to outmigration for better opportunities to get out of discrimination, the Christian population continues to go down. So it's just utterly contradictory to the facts to pretend like Israeli control equals declining Christians when the exact opposite is the truth.
Yeah. And the declining Christian populations have been in the Gaza Strip and in Area A controlled parts of the West Bank, which is where Bethlehem is and where this nun is at. And so then to disingenuously try and say, no, there's no conflict between Christians and Muslims, and the population is declining in Israel, but it's actually not in Israel. It's in the areas that are sovereignly controlled by the PA or Hamas. It's just a lie. Really, it's a manipulation. And then you have to start questioning, like, well, what is Tucker Carlson's motive in distorting the truth this much? And I think it's becoming more and more clear that it's in sympathy with Islamism and trying to frame the West as like this villain, and Christians in the West as just being deeply misinformed, and there's propaganda. And they'll talk about this idea of the mission of greater Israel. We'll look at that before we end this, but almost like referring to Israel as this regime, and there's this like concerted effort to deceive the Christians here in the West. And even like the term like greater Israel, it sounds like even like Nazi language. So the insinuation, the implications that Tucker Carlson is making are quite dangerous. But we'll get to that part in a second.
The Holocaust is a horrible, horrible thing that happened. People slaughtered fairly quickly. Sometimes the thought comes to me when I've driven between, there's a tunnel road that goes from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and it's only for the settlers to go on down to the continued settlements that lead down further south in Israel to Hebron, or actually I shouldn't say Israel, into Palestine, other Palestinian territory. As you're going, that tunnel road has been carved out of land that belongs to people in Bethlehem and Bejala, which you're passing by on that tunnel road.
I do think it's interesting she recognizes Palestinian territory, but she fails to mention where Bethlehem sits and all of that. And so again, kind of like you were saying, like dancing around facts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a living death. How would you like to be a man? That was your grandfather's olive trees, but now it's controlled by Israel, and you're not even allowed to drive on that road. And on that very same road, I remember a poignant picture. There was a woman that worked at our convent, she was a nurse and took care of the nuns. And she had a home, a very typical stone Arab home, beautiful home with grapevines. I remember going to pick the grapes at the house. That is now part of Israel. They just confiscated the land. She fought it. She fought as long as she could to try to keep her property. And I remember passing by there some years, and there's slowly, new Israel homes are being built that look very different. And there's something that looks out of, as if it belongs to biblical Palestine. And so what I was getting at is that these people, they're dying as they're living.
Biblical Palestine, well, it wasn't called Palestine in the Bible. The Romans renamed the area Syria Palestina after the great enemies of the Israelites. But again, so there's no biblical Palestine.
Because it's like, and I remember sitting at the home of one of those people in Bejala, and they had lived in the center of town. It was his father's home, and then he built a new one near the Talitha Kumi Lutheran school. And I literally was sitting with them one afternoon, and he gets a call from his brother. The Israelis are here. They're pulling up our olive trees, cutting them down on some of their land. And he ran over. He collected as many of the trees as he could. Military order. That's what it was. They just go and do it, even though it's not their land. And then military order, nothing you can do. They have jeeps and weapons. You're not going to stop them. But he was able to take some of those trees. This shows the resiliency, and the word is samud. It's like, it's a quiet persistence. This is our land, and we're going to stay here. And this man is a doctor who studied in Hungary. He took those olive trees, and they now are on a plot of land next to his new house and trying to grow. So it's like, I'm not sure what Israel is trying to do. I mean, it's horrific what's going on in Gaza. And what is very concerning to me, and why I'm grateful to be on your show, is that what is going to happen, the people that I know in the West Bank, Christian and Muslim, it's not said, but it's like, we're next. That what they've done to Gaza is going to come to us, because who's going to stop them? Already in the northern parts where the UNRWA, the refugee camps were, I was there in September. They'd already been making raids. I was in the center of Jenin, right in front of the...
Yes, because UNRWA has now been very, very clearly linked to Hamas and Islamic Jihad.
Multiple workers there were caught housing hostages, hiding them, working directly with Hamas.
Yeah, no duh. Just like the lying and like but again, this woman is an apologist. I have to take a step back. She's an apologist for Islamic Jihad as a Christian. So what do I expect?
The Catholic Church, they had bulldozed the middle of the road and broken the water pipes. No bullet holes. I lived in 2002 during the Intifada in Bethlehem. The whole city was full of bullet holes. So there hadn't been any confrontations, but they were still bulldozing and doing what they wanted to do to wreck the infrastructure, to make it harder for people to go to work up there. But now, in the last 8 months, they've cleared out at least 15,000 people in Tulkarm and Jenin in the northern part. They're not in their homes. Do you hear those stories? And these affect Christians as well.
So why do American Christian churches send money to a government that does this to Christians?
Well, I think the ones that send...
Do you know of anyone who, like, I don't know if we're sending money to the Israeli government. We might send money for aid or for different NGOs and stuff. But even like the framework of this, like Christians in America are being like deceived or being propagated into sending money to the Israeli government so the government can directly persecute their fellow brothers and or brothers and sisters in Christ. Even like the question is framed.
Yeah, it's absurd. I mean, there's a whole variety of different charitable causes that exist there, as in other places. We at Philos have directly been involved, like times handing the cash itself to help Christians in Israel. Some of that's also got to Christians involved in the West Bank and Gaza. We've done the same also for some of our Jewish friends that are speakers or have other projects going on. And we often have Muslim speakers come and we pay them as well. There's a whole philanthropic structure that goes to a variety of different causes. But yeah, it's just a weird idea that just tons of people in the US are writing checks to, build a settlement or a house. By and large, that's not how these things are happening. And just as a overall point on this, it gets murky because people throw out anecdotes and how do you know what's true, what's happening. But there is a system of law that applies in the West Bank and other places where if somebody actually has a claim to that land, that they can prove it, like this is their land. Israel imported the system that the Ottomans had, and the British also used that same system. If you have that land deed, that's your land, and there can be disputes or whatever, but I've not heard a case where they actually have the deed and they have the land and they lose that. What often happens is it's a colloquial thing that like, oh, we've lived around these hills and maybe my grandfather came from Jordan or Egypt or other things. You can actually tell this too, and a lot of the surnames of Palestinians have origins that go back to family names in either Saudi Arabia or Egypt. Maybe they came hundreds of years ago, maybe they came 80 years ago, whatever. But whoever is established to have the claim to that land is the one that has it. So if you just happen to have a handshake agreement where you went and grazed or had olive trees in this area close to where you live, that's not the same thing as actually owning the land. And it can get complicated when those disputes come up. But it's just painting this narrative that like, it doesn't matter. They just go and they take whatever they want and it doesn't matter who owns it. It's a weird system that this is true across a lot of the Arab world as well, especially in the Bedouin society, but there's not the same norms or respect for legal processes, deeds, all those kind of things. A lot of things are like customary. And then as Israel created as a new nation state and also took frameworks from European law and other systems where you actually have to have proof and establish things, that clashed with these kind of tribal, wink and nod systems. And so that can get messy, and I'm sure sometimes abuses can happen. But again, one system has an actual legal process for potential redress. The other system has legal impediments that are bad for Christians. They want to legally bar Jews from living anywhere under their rule. So to, again, make any kind of equivocation between these things is just disingenuous.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks, Isaac, for the context. The ad came up and then I was like, oh no, forgot to comment on that.
Money that support the settlements are obviously the Christian Zionists. There's an organization called Christians United for Israel, Pastor John Hagee. I was in Washington a few weeks ago because, they had a conference in Baltimore. So it's slowly growing an awareness by other Christians in America that just like many Jews are protesting and saying not in our name, and the Jewish Voice for Peace, there has to be much more done by the Christians in America because these Christian Zionists are speaking in our name. Someone like Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz, is saying and doing what he's doing because he's following a Christianity that is not the Christianity of the Holy Land. It's not the Christianity of a Catholic or an Orthodox or a traditional Christian.
So her Christianity, which sympathizes with Islamic Jihad, is the Christianity of the Holy Land. That's a lie. There are, of course, theological differences in the West and obviously in the East, but and there's a more Orthodox framework in the East. But yeah, anyways, okay, we're about to respond to what is Christian Zionism, and like surprise, she does not represent what it is in truth at all.
It's a heretical belief.
What is Christian Zionism?
As far as I understand it, they believe in the idea of the rapture. They believe that it's sort of this cruel bargain they have going with Israel, because basically what they say that they're going to be swooped up into heaven, right? And then there's going to be a 1,000-year kingdom, and then there'll be the end of the world and the judgment by Christ, and he'll come back. This is a false. It was condemned as a heresy in 381 because basically there is no 1,000-year millennium to come, no 1,000-year period. The end. We are in that time period now, and so it's a false belief there. And so
basically what they're arguing is that Jesus coming the first time wasn't enough?
Yeah. It's like, in a way, it's denying the Messiah. As an Orthodox Christian, the most important thing in my life is that we receive the body and blood of Christ, and we prepare ourselves to receive that body because Christ came as God and as man. And if you read John, it's actually 6.
So let's just tackle that first part. And there's this new on the woke right effort to say, oh, Christian Zionists are like what Tucker said, saying that Christ coming the first time wasn't enough. Well, we know that there's going to be a second coming of Christ. So is Tucker saying that the Bible is wrong and scripture is wrong? Because we know that to be true. People debate like the rapture, and there are differences in eschatological beliefs in what the end times look like, but we know Christ is coming again for a second time. That's just fact if you're a Christian. So I don't know if you want to address what is Christian Zionism, because it's not an eschatological belief. It's not dispensationalism as she's trying to describe it. That's not at all what Christian Zionism is.
Yeah, so for viewers that have done any of our programs, and you can see more about this on our website as well, we give theological overviews. We don't take a stance on this is the only valid or the only right interpretation of scripture when it comes to Jews, the land, and the second coming or anything like that. I and you and our organization has never built any support for a political state over like a particular view of the end times. I think Revelations is complicated. What exactly it looks like, we'll know on the other side of heaven. But it's just massively disingenuous to imply that Christians that support Israel do so only for this instrumental kind of tool. It's not that nobody has the belief about the second coming or the rapture, but to say that that is the majority support is just not reflected in polling. It's not accurate. She clearly has a very loose, not accurate understanding of American evangelical theology or other various perspectives and nuances, although she has a lot to say about nuances of Muslim belief and what it means to be a pious Muslim. So it's interesting that she doesn't know her own side as well as she claims to know the Muslim side in her defense of one and her indictment of the other. But at its basic level, Zionism means the belief that Jews have some right to live in the historic Holy Land without being killed. That's the basics. What that looks like, who's in control of the government, what the borders are, all of that kind of thing is up for prudential debate. But that is the basic belief of Zionism. And Christians have coalesced behind that belief because of our shared values. It's the land of Christ, even at the very least level, like we want access to the holy sites, all of these various other things. And that is facilitated best by the state of Israel. It's where Christians have enjoyed the most freedoms and opportunities since going back to the Byzantine Empire period, really. You don't have a better situation for Christians in Israel than you do now until you go back to that far. So it's sloppy thinking. It's inaccurate. Tucker seems to be wildly ignorant on this stuff too. He just does this posture. He'll just ask an open-ended question and then take as gospel, pun intended, whatever this nun espouses. So
yeah. I don't know, Isaac, you're being generous. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. Because there is this concerted effort on the woke right to say that dispensationalism and Darby and the Scofield Bible were basically commissioned by the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds to propagate American Christians to support a state of Israel that didn't exist at that time. Again, like they give the Jews so much credit and so much like foresight to know that like 40 years after the state of Israel would be founded and 2 world wars would happen. But anyways, the claim is that this was created by Jews to pervert theology and get Christians in America to support Israel. Like it's so incredibly just fallacious and unrealistic to paint such an oversimplification. I'm not a dispensationalist. I don't believe you're a dispensationalist.
No, and I'll recommend for people, I mean, we could link it below, but 2 great books on this. One, The Bible and the Sword by Barbara Tuchman, who's a British historian, and she goes through the history of kind of the English-speaking peoples and their thoughts about Jews, and then eventually what came to be the creation of Israel. It's an interesting one to go through. And then also Ark of a Covenant by Walter Russell Mead, which looks at the history of American relations with Israel and really busts a lot of narratives with this idea that like we created the state of Israel or that we were always just so pro and it was dependent on that. There were ebbs and flows and a lot of other complexities. And within that, there were many people in different camps of Christianity that supported it for this or that reason. But again, I think the straw man of upholding this is that people support Israel or have this belief in spite of injustice or it not being legitimate. And 2 things can be true. There can be theological reasons for support, but also as Christians, we're supposed to use, the natural law, use our own reason and faculties. And God does not command us to blindly support any country, whether that's America or Israel or anything, in spite of immorality or lack of evidence. But they implicitly try to say this as if they believe it only for this reason, and then also are excusing things that are false. So they'll misrepresent about the nature of Israel, but then also claim people only support it for this like dumb theological reason in their view. So it's false on both counts.
Yeah, absolutely. And also there's nothing wrong with being a Christian. Like I can only speak for like my own theological justification. I think having a historic view of nation state building post World War II and decolonization, having a nation state for the Jewish people makes a lot of sense in just understanding how the Middle East was reframed after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So there's a historic context. And to be a Christian Zionist doesn't say that there can't be a Palestinian state as well. And the reason states have been spoiled and self-determination has been spoiled because of Hamas and other Islamic movements that have rejected peace settlements. I pulled up the Hamas charter and it rejects the peace settlement. It even rejects the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. The status quo of the Arab world until I think more recently on October 7th has been no acceptance of a Palestinian state that's not like zero sum or in favor of the Palestinian people. So it makes building a nation very difficult when a large swath of the population you're trying to allow to self-determine doesn't want to under any compromise and has a very zero-sum objective. But besides that, there's nothing wrong with being, and this is what I think Tucker Carlson and the woke right is trying to frame, there's nothing wrong with being a Christian who supports political Zionism. And part of that belief is, well, okay, my savior and the Messiah is Jewish. And so there is some sort of Jewish identity and Hebraic context to my own faith. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think the woke right is trying to frame that as like wrong, like either a heresy or like false theology. And I don't believe that to be true at all. Okay, so we'll continue this section, then we're going to skip to the what is the purpose of Hamas, and we'll end on that beautiful note.
6:6. First he says, "Take, eat, this is my body, and drink, this is my blood." And many people that heard the saying and found it to be a hard saying and turned away from him.
Yeah.
So everybody was Jewish then, right? But some believed and some didn't. And some continued to follow only the law. And some said, and Christ superseded the law. He said, there's something more than that law. I am the law. I fulfill the law and the prophets. We believe in the Feast of the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor. It takes place near Nazareth. I've been there many times. And in our icons, in our images, you see Moses.
She's been to the site of the Transfiguration, which is in Israel proper. So she's, again, silently acknowledging that she's been allowed to worship and visit the holy sites of her faith in Israel.
And you see Elijah aside Jesus, because the law and the prophets have been fulfilled in Jesus Christ. He came and said, I'm the church, I'm your salvation. And you know what I think often about is where I lived in the Mount of Olives, St. Mary Magdalene Convent, right above it is a Catholic monastery called Dominus Flavit, Christ wept. It's where Christ wept. And I think of it often now because to some degree with Muslims, to a lesser degree, because they retain some of the Christian sensibility, but he's weeping over the people that didn't see him, that didn't understand who he was.
I don't know why she keeps trying to frame Islam as like this fulfillment almost of like Christianity. In almost every way, it's a rejection of Christianity, even like in their own theology. So it's very interesting to me. I don't know if you have a thought on that, Isaac, but she keeps kind of saying like the Muslims preserved a sensibility of Christianity. And like there really is no evidence of that historically or in the Quran in large as a rejection of it. Even as you mentioned earlier, like they view Jesus Christ as weak in our understanding of God. Because God would never come and die on a cross in a lowly way.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, again, such sloppy reasoning. You know, if you're talking to a friend and you discuss a mutual friend, you say, oh yeah, I love Jim. Jim's great. I hung out with him last week. And then they ask like, oh, great. Did you do this? Because I know Jim loves this. And you start to describe this person, Jim, and you see you two have radically different versions of what he is. Like one thinks he's super tall, one thinks he's short, one thinks he's blind, all of these contrasts. So yes, the name Jesus exists in the Quran, and Muslims inherited odd desert tribal heresies that had circulated down into the Arabian Peninsula. We know this because some of the same weird beliefs they have about Jesus, some weird off-the-wall stories, we can find in contemporaneous heretical Christian sects that largely were just very separated from Orthodox Christianity and didn't know better. So Muhammad takes that, tries to synthesize a lot of it, and then also maybe under hallucination, maybe under demonic influences, gets more revelations that he puts forward and then kind of codifies these things. It's got a very common source back there. And so, yeah, to pretend like this is a commonality when they completely pervert and distort the idea of what Jesus is,
reject him. Yeah.
inaccurate.
Yeah. And well, in the same way that she's talking about, well, the Jews had a chance and they rejected Christ. It's like, okay, well, the Muslims reject Christ as well. And they don't view Christ as their savior. Like that message of salvation is completely missing from Jesus as a prophet, one of many, 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 many prophets in the Quran. So if her argument is, well, the Jews rejected Christ, and like the follow through of that supersessionist kind of idea is that somehow now there's no covenant with the Jews, or maybe even like Candace Owens, like the Jews have like a curse and it's upon their generations and their people for killing Christ. It's like, okay, well, Islam also rejects Christ and Christ's identity as
and
savior.
has waged many, many wars over the centuries to try to eradicate and subjugate Christians.
Yeah.
Which
has not
in this
happened with the
situation in the
Jews.
first place? Because the Christian Byzantine Empire was overthrown by multiple Muslim conquests and hordes, and yet now she's acting like, I think it's somewhat of like Stockholm syndrome that some Christians get from being in the Middle East or under the Muslim control. They're just happy to get any scrap or be alive, but then to totally distort history and to attack Israel by contrast when they actually are respecting Christians in the defense of your overlords that you just want to please. It's painting a massively inaccurate picture to global Christianity. It's trying to understand what's happening in this region.
Yeah. And even like to go back to how she described, like Tucker saying, well, wasn't the first coming like sufficient enough? That's something I've heard kind of being whispered around the woke right as well. Again, ignoring the fact that the Bible says that there will be a second coming. Apparently Tucker knows more than the Bible and prophetic prophecy.
But also too, it's such a distortion, because even if you take, it's such a pet peeve of mine when people don't just disagree with a ideology or a theological view, they just distort it and then paint a caricature. Like you can reject dispensationalism, but accurately state what it does. So there's the study of soteriology, salvation, what Christ did on the cross. That is one thing here. Then there's eschatology about the end times. How is history going to play out through these prophecies and revelations? Soteriology, how you're saved, is not about the eschatology. Nobody thinks Christ didn't bleed enough on the cross and he has to come back and do it again. But there are prophecies and accounts of what's going to happen later in the end times that is unrelated to that fundamental concept. So they're acting as if they're attacking the soteriology of this camp of theology that they don't understand and implying that it negates or somehow lessens Christ's sacrifice. Yeah.
And what she's essentially dispelling is replacement theology, supersessionism, which is of no surprise. Candace, everyone who claims to be a Christian who adheres to this woke right ideology, that is a cornerstone of their justification. Okay, so I'm just going to skip to the part of what is the purpose of Hamas and kind of end more on this like political note.
When they're nothing like that.
Are they, I mean, I'm sure you've dealt with Hamas or know people who, right? Are they religious fanatics? Are they jihadis?
Not the people that I know. Like I said, when I was again in at the school, we had a couple teachers, Muslim men, and there were some elections going on. And it wasn't Hamas then. It was a social party or something. It was definitely a Muslim religious party. I would have voted for those guys because they weren't corrupt.
Her smile is so...
They wanted to serve their people, and that's what it was about. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen anywhere. I'm not totally ingrained in the community, but the vibe there isn't one of wanting everybody to convert to Islam and forcing it upon them at all. And the purpose of Hamas is primarily to resist and to protect their people. And
No, this is a lie. It's like, I just want to go back to Tucker's like initial question, because it's like such a stupid question.
The people that I know, like I said, when I was again at this, we have to plaster them as being these jihadists when they're nothing like that.
Are they, I mean, I'm sure you've dealt with Hamas or know people who, right? Are they religious fanatics? Are they jihadis?
Yes. If you are a member of an Islamic terror organization, then you are a jihadi. Like, yes, that is the definition of it.
If in the midst of your rapes and murder and torture that you film with GoPros and put out, you're constantly screaming, God is great in Arabic, and you don't think that's some aspect of religious fanaticism, you're just completely out to lunch. It's also, again, a false dichotomy. You can have nationalistic aims for what you want your Muslim supremacist society to look like, what the border should be, and also have religious motivations. The two things are not in conflict. They actually feed together in a really corrupt way across the Middle East in different countries, particularly where the Muslim Brotherhood's involved. And that's in contrast to like Al-Qaeda, which wanted to carry out jihad in a more internationalist, different way. But just because there are different flavors of bad ideologies doesn't mean like one that isn't Al-Qaeda is somehow okay. Like if you were to compare the history of racial discrimination in the US, you could have full-on slavery or the Jim Crow era with occasional lynchings or others. Like, is it incrementally better after slavery? Yes, but evil things still happened, and you don't get like a gold star for being the Jim Crow segregationist rather than the slavery person. They're both bad. And in this case, yes, they're not ISIS, but Hamas is still evil and virulent. And just looking at what they did, what they bragged about, what they say they want to do again, if that doesn't make them into religious, moral, evil fanatics, I don't know what is. And yes, if you want to sprinkle nationalism into there too, that's fine. But it doesn't negate the other.
Well, and also just fundamentally, Islam spread by the sword. So unlike Christianity, Islam is fundamentally both religious, militaristic, and political. That's how Islam spread. Although people will disagree with that again, because in order acknowledging that means you have to confront some of the problematic aspects of Islamism and political Islam. But yes, you can say Hamas wants a state. Yes, that's true. But what do they want to do with that state? What are the rules that state will be governed by? A radical implementation of Islam, and essentially reinstating some sort of a caliph. So again, for Tucker to be like, oh, are they jihadi? Are they jihadists? Like, do they believe in radical Islam? It's like, yes, jihad is literally revolutionary Islam. So yes, Tucker, yes. So one of my favorite content creators, the Apostate Prophet, he posted this to his ex and he took it down. So that's why I have to kind of pull from his YouTube video. But he essentially kind of debunks what she's saying about Hamas. So I'm going to play this in closing because he did a great job.
I'm losing it again here. So I'm going to actually sit down and upon request by so many people who apparently think I didn't watch the whole thing and I need to watch it to get a better idea, I will go through the entire interview here. I will check it all out. However, before doing that, I actually want to do something very nice, because here's the thing. When somebody asked me to sit down and watch it, I actually clicked on the video. And the first thing that I saw, I don't know how I saw that, but the first thing that I saw is that there was a chapter about Hamas. So I thought, wait, what was that? And then I went there. What is the purpose of Hamas? And I heard what was being said, and I listened to the stuff around it. And then you already see this, the mission for greater Israel. Now, I would expect a person who is truthful and who is honest to sit down and say, oh yeah, the greater Israel, no, that's just a conspiracy theory. There's actually no such thing. It's actually just a hoax. But no, she sits down and says, oh yeah, Israel has this greater Israel plan and all that. Yeah, that's totally happening. Then she talks about Hamas and how good Hamas is. So I made a video earlier today just to get into the mood of pointing out what's wrong with her. And I'm going to play that. And I apologize for depicting her as an evil devil. I probably shouldn't do that. And I also apologize for saying that for all I care, she could die together with the Hamas terrorists. I do not apologize for saying that she's an evil, filthy liar. So, but here, let's look at that.
We're just flooded with this message that those terrorists are coming to get us next, which is absurd. Has any member of Hamas or anybody of Palestinian come and threatened America as an American? No, that's not what they're about.
First of all, I want to point something out here before continuing with this video. With the video, I've mainly focused on just inserting clips to challenge her. Hamas did actually directly engage in international terrorism and also killing Americans.
So for those who are just listening, he is taking clips of Hamas spokesperson, and he's saying the entire 510 million square kilometers of planet Earth will come under system. No oppression, no treachery, no Zionism, no treacherous Christianity. So again, let's just take the words of the Hamas militants and radical jihadists and not the word of this nun who apparently is an apologist for them.
Right.
I would have voted for those guys because
she's talking about Hamas.
I would have voted for those guys because they weren't corrupt. They wanted to serve their people, and that's what it was about.
وفي كل مرة أكرر إن دماء الأطفال والنساء والشيوخ لا أقول تستصرخكم بل نحن الذين نحتاج هذه الدماء لكي توقظ فينا روح الثورة.
I'm not saying
He's talking about taking the blood of women and children to awaken the revolutionary spirit of Hamas.
it doesn't happen anywhere. I'm not totally ingrained in the community, but I don't. It doesn't. The vibe there isn't one of wanting everybody to convert to Islam and forcing it upon them at all. At all.
So after the nation has been healed of its cancer, the Jews, all are willing. And again, remember the Jews, the people of the book, are both enemies of Islam's end time. Okay, so you get the gist, Isaac. But it's like hearing from the mouth of Hamas spokesperson. And they said that they wanted to march on Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, I believe in 2024, and basically implement an October 7th again. They've said that they will continue to try and commit October 7th over and over and over again. That is out of their own mouths. So if you listened to the Tucker Carlson interview with this nun, listen to what the Hamas militants say themselves, not her. And I just find the entire, and we can do another episode, Isaac, on like the greater mission of Israel and this idea that this is some sort of coordinated ideological conspiracy on the part of the Israeli regime. That's a whole video we could do in and of itself. But again, just pointing to all of the corrections that we have made, and there's a lot more that could have been made. I think Tucker Carlson is just proving more and more and more where his motives lie and what his agenda is. And if you are a Christian, doesn't mean you have to support everything that Israel does. It's like the only country in the world that apparently Christians have to have some sort of like moral indictment of or position on. But yeah, doesn't mean you have to be an apologist for Israel, but you can still support Israel's right to defend itself after October 7th, which is a very fundamental right of sovereignty. And everything else in this video is essentially Hamas propaganda. It's not even just asking questions anymore. It's very, very overt. Do you have any closing kind of thoughts?
Yeah. And again, it's totally fair to critique any country. Again, we make this analogy. We're patriotic Americans, but we often have problems. And based on our politics, if the other party's in charge, you're going to dislike what's happening more so than when your people are in charge. And Israel should be treated no different than that. They're on net an ally, a moral nation, a benefit. Doesn't mean they're perfect. It's legitimate to have gripes or, complaints or this or that. Israelis are far better at that than Americans. There's vigorous political debate and disputes. However, if the narrative you paint continually distorts what's actually happening, excuses one side, excuses Hamas, the PA, the Muslim supremacist societies around them, and constantly indicts Jews, sloppily talks about Israeli control and Christians declining, when actually where Israel does have full control, Christians are increasing, Christians are suffering under Muslims. It's just a massively dishonest picture. And I wish he could have posed this simple question to the nun. Okay, so you care about Christians in the Holy Land. Let's make that all of Palestinian territories and Israel. Would it be better or worse for Christians if tomorrow the Jews lost total control and it was controlled by the Muslim majority? Would that be better or worse? It's an eminently obvious answer that it would be worse. Mm-hmm. We can see directly to the extent they have more Muslim control in Palestinian areas, the Christians have suffered, they have legal impediments, and their population's declining. It's not even something you could debate. Mm-hmm. But that fundamental question is never asked. Individual anecdotes or situations are nitpicked and paint this overall wildly distorted picture that it's really tragic to see somebody in religious life being a mouthpiece for this. And as Christians, we're not called to blindly support anything or any country, but we are called to be honest, to use our reason, and to dissect things, with accuracy. And there was no examples of that in this past interview that they did.
No. And really quick before we go, this is just a graph for those who don't understand. Bethlehem, where she was largely talking about, is in Area A. So it's completely administered, both civil and security, by the Palestinian Authority. You would have thought that what they're talking about is this Area C part of the West Bank administered by Israel, but it's not. It's in the all Arab part. So you should start asking questions about what life is like for Christians or just for Arab Palestinians under the all Arab control territories.
And we've seen these areas too, to the extent Muslim Palestinians are closer to Area C, it's often better for them. We've taken many trips to Area L and to other settlements where the factory workers, almost all the employees in many of these places, are local Palestinians that come in and make far better wages, have good incomes, and proximity to growth and flourishing and economic productivity is good. And also, too, the other thing is just wildly distorted for people that haven't been there. So much of the West Bank is kind of barren rocks or unsettled areas. And almost always when you see settlements come up, they are in a deserted, empty place, and then something's there that was not. And it should be a fundamental problem if one side of it resents the fact that a Jew might be living somewhere on a rock next to them. Even if they build a factory, they do jobs, they have economic exchange, their infrastructure improves, but the fact that a Jew might be there is, intolerable. And that is the stated premise of both the Palestinian Authority, what they want. They want a Jewish-free state, and also even more so Hamas in Gaza. If one side is willing to live alongside their neighbors, even with complications, and the other makes it a prerequisite that you cannot live in my area, I think that tells you about the morality of the different sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been in Israel too, where our Jewish tour guides don't go with us to Bethlehem because there's an intolerance for the Jew, just like Tucker Carlson.
Yes, they could be killed for having the gall to walk a street in a majority Muslim Arab part of the West Bank.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a Christian who has walked in Israel and has walked in the West Bank Area A territory, I have felt wildly safer in Israel proper than even just being a Christian American walking to the church of the Nativity. Well, Isaac, thank you so much. Sorry, I was so impassioned. I just get so mad. I rebuke this.
Always gets our blood up on this.
I know. No, and this nun is just, she's a liar. And so I rebuke whatever spirit is driving those falsehoods. So anyways, thank you, Isaac. I will see you in our next reaction video.
All right. Thanks, Dominique.